how would you describe what a chapter is and what a chapter meeting is like?
Yeah, well, I'm gonna steal all of these guys' answers. Hopefully, I don't say everything, and then they're like, "Yeah, I do that one." Because I onboard new staff. I train the new staff in what Ratio Christi is and the DNA of Ratio Christi and how to do things well, so they don't step over themselves and make a bunch of mistakes. But as far as running meetings goes, it's it's wide enough to accommodate your excited ideas as well as the campus issues that's going on. And we have some best practices, and I can say a few of them. I mean, there's just the lecture method with some discussion questions where you just lecture for 40 minutes and then there's discussion questions after. That happens quite a bit. Not my favorite. But my favorite, I'll tell mine. My favorite is, and my students down in Kansas City named it the Flux Capacitor. So they have a student give a talk for 20 to 30 minutes, and then the latter half of the meeting is a flux capacitor, which is where three people sit in the middle, and then they form a little circle around them, and they have a little mock conversation where one person takes on the persona of whatever was talked about. So say you were talking about arguments for the resurrection. And so then somebody takes on the position of an atheist and argues against, or takes those arguments and says, no, I don't believe in a resurrection because of blank and blank and blank. And then there's two people who are playing the Christians, who are Christians, but they're playing the Christians and they're arguing with this fake atheist or unbeliever of some stripe, And then the people in the officers surrounding everybody periodically pause the conversation and ask the people watching if they saw what happened, like what conversational move just took place, and if the person did a good job or did a bad job. So and then they'll be like, hey, did you see that they did a little red herring thing, and then they took the bait? So let's rewind the conversation. That's why it's called the flux capacitor. You go back and forth in time. They rewind the conversation and push play, and then the person does a different thing, and then everyone sees the outcome. So what we're doing, and not only are we training them in the ABCs of the content, we are training them in how to engage well and notice those conversational moves. So that's my favorite way to do a meeting. And I teach it to everybody that comes through my training in hopes of them doing it themselves. But there are, 12 different ways to do a meeting. That one's just my favorite.
Yeah. Tyler, how about you? Do you have a preferred method of running the meeting?
Yeah, so the chapters that I have, Grove City is actually the only one that is like fully established on campus. So they very much have that like lecture style, and then discussion questions at the end. But at my other chapters, like Homing and Penn, so they're budding. So it's really just getting the students to talk about these things and actually get it out of their head and into the world and seeing how they do with it. So it's very much like I do most of the preparing and I just kind of lead the discussion. I ask pointed questions to kind of see where they're at and how they're thinking. And it works really well with our non-Christian students, specifically because now they're able to like push back as well. They feel that freedom because it's very free flow conversation. So it's kind of like if I was going to describe it in like non-Ratio Christi terms, it's honestly like a round table coffee conversation.
Yeah.
Where it's very, very low structure to be the most welcoming conversation possible, even though we're talking about the most deep things of God.
And so you're having these conversations with non-believers coming, chatting with you. Is that part of like your tabling, or is this part of like when you've got a structured meeting time, or both?
So that's all during the meeting.
Okay.
So I have one student that is like gung ho about this, and he's invited more people than my Christian students have. It's
Wow.
mind boggling. I love it.
Yeah. He's
So
he's probably thinking this is like Stump the Christian, and he's inviting all his non-believing friends.
yeah. Well, some of them were actually Christians, and they were doing this. They were like, "Yeah, this sounds fun." But yeah, so um, yeah, it's just during the meeting and very low structure. During the tabling, it's a lot more structured. But
Yeah.
I'm assuming we're going to get to tabling at some
Yeah,
point.
we'll get to tabling. Yeah, yeah. Good. Okay, Julian, how do you run your meetings? Is it lecture? Is it student-led lecture as opposed to chapter director-led?
It's generally lecture, but there's a lot of variation on top of that. So to give you an example, what I'd like to try to do is have a third of the presenters be staff, like me and the other volunteers, a third be students with an emphasis on the student leaders, and a third be guest speakers if we can get them in. But last semester we had, I think, 7 or 8 students step up to do presentations. And that wasn't a student doing a couple at a time. It was 7 or 8 individual students doing that, which I thought was fantastic.
And if you meet once a week, that's basically half the semester, so you're at 50-50, right?
Yeah, it was pretty much that. Yeah, the other half was the volunteers and a couple guest speakers. Yeah. On top of that, it can go a couple different ways. So sometimes everybody's really focused in on the presentation and we do Q&A at the end, and that just sort of happens like that. Sometimes it's more open-ended for discussion and people will raise their hands. Sometimes I like to be the first person because other people don't want to be the first person to ask a question, so I'll just do it. I'll, poke the bear, but, get the conversation started. And then sometimes I like to ask the presenters, if I know what they're going to present on and we're working through the presentation the previous week, I'll ask them to put a couple slides in that say, discussion question, what did you think about, blah, 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 that we just talked about, or how would this apply in such and such situation, or something like that. And everybody breaks off into groups of 3 or 5 or whatever and talks about it for a few minutes. Then we come back and discuss that, and then we move on with the presentation. So generally lecture, but it'll go all over the place. The meeting that we just had our first meeting this Monday. It was about a 40-minute presentation, and then I think an hour and a half of talking about all sorts of related things. And that went all over the place, but it was a great discussion.
Good. Chris, how about you?
Yeah, our chapter is pretty similar to what Julian described. It is lecture, so someone will have a PowerPoint presentation that it might only be 25 slides long or so. So, normally that's 35 minutes of just the presenter talking, but throughout that 30 that time is interrupted a lot of times with discussions just break out. I like to encourage attendees I say that we're not in class. You don't have to raise a hand if I say, okay, first point on the slide is whatever, and they say, I've got a thought about that. Go ahead. This is what we're here for. So kind of lecture discussion, if whatever term you want to prefer there. And like Julian, we try and emphasize students presenting. So that's one thing that's myself and my partner in crime, Cade is his name. That's one thing we've emphasized last year and then going into this year. We want each one of our student officers to give a presentation on a different topic each semester. So we've had them speak on the problem of evil, God and money. Our former student president, who's in accounting, gave a presentation on how the Christian worldview interacts with the topic of money. They've talked about the history of science and religion. Is it a conflict? So yeah, we have a similar mix of guest speakers. Myself and Cade might each speak once or twice per semester. It's about 5 probably between the two of us, and then student leaders will take up another 4 or 5, and then we've got some guest presenters. So we try to keep a cap on the guest speakers to about 2 or 3 per semester.
Julian mentioned.
I'm going to jump in real quick. Yeah, just getting the students up there is just the best thing ever, because then they get to do study on their own, and then and then present. One of my favorite questions to ask students whenever I'm on campus, especially someone who's been coming quite a bit, I always ask them, if you were to give a talk at a Ratio Christi, what would it be about? And then they're like, oof, and then they say, oh, probably something with history or something like it, whatever they answer. And then I jokingly but serious say, all right, be ready to give that next semester. And then they're like, oh goodness, but then that's the thing. I'm always pushing them up front to be good leaders and take over and enjoy the club more. That's the culture we're building.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things about the chapter is training students to go and do likewise. It's pretty easy for myself and Cade, and those of us on this call who have spent time studying this for a while to just speak on a topic for an hour every week for the semester, and that's that. But our students, we want to train them to be effective communicators of the truth, and so that's what we want to put them in a position to do.
If I could add to that, I'm in a unique position because not every person who runs a chapter is full-time. I'm full-time. Some people are volunteers, so they have a day job. But what I do allows me to take time during the week to meet up at a coffee house or something with the student who's going to present next week and work through their presentation. I can help them research stuff. I can point them to resources. They can bounce ideas off of me. We can go through their presentation and go, maybe this will be too long. Maybe you need to add more information. Maybe this isn't going to go over so well. All that kind of stuff.
Julian, I'm curious, is that something that you've made mandatory, or is that something that you kind of just offer and students have now taken it?
I offer it because sometimes I know the students and I know they're pretty confident on a topic,
right,
and they'll be okay. They usually don't take a topic that they have no idea what to do about it. So they have some idea what they're going to talk about, but if a lot of them are apprehensive because public speaking is a common fear people have. And if they need help with making sure they're confident with it, at least in the knowledge, then yeah, I offer it and they can take it or leave it.
Yeah, so I wanted to chime in because all three of you guys seem to have a little bit bigger chapters than I do. So on the small group section, so I was going through like Doug Groteis's Christian apologetics. It's like all encompassing, so we could just use that for like 3 or 4 years and just use that as our main discipleship and training mechanism. But when it comes to the students leading it, it's like, hey, pick something from the book that you really enjoy and just come prepared. But then kind of like what Julian was saying, like I'll meet up with them if I'm available and if they are available as well, to just go through, hey, are you okay? Like with the content, was there anything in there that really screwed with you? And we're just like send you for a loop, and how can we provide clarity so whenever you're leading the discussion, you have a good, clear sense of where you're going. And if you need to clarify something, don't rely on me. I want this to be, your discussion. Take ownership of it, and then kind of give them the reins. But at the same time, before I hand it off, making sure that they feel prepared.